thank both guests for joining us, but also talk a little bit about today's theme. Planning this episode has been a long process. This is before Que Sepas was even a concept. The idea of hosting a conversation around this topic was brought to us. Ultimately, the Que Sepas series was born out of that, but it was thinking about the importance of this specific conversation and the issues that our country is dealing with. Um, that elevated the importance of being prepared and creating space to ensure that these perspectives and these experiences are heard. And so today we're going to be talking about perspectives within the Latinx community related to anti-Blackness and some racism that still exists within our own community. Before we dive into that subject, I would want to give the guests an opportunity to introduce themselves. Our co-host today is Carminia Munoz. Carminia, do you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Carmenia Munoz. I am based here in Phoenix and have lived here now for about 6 or 7 years, but am originally from New York. I work in education. I work for Teach for America doing alumni leadership support. So I help support over 1,000 alumni across the state of Arizona, many of whom are currently teaching, and then a good percentage who are taught for 2 years or more and are now in other roles, mostly serving low-income communities or education in some capacity. But I am excited to be here and be part of this conversation, wearing my Carminia the human hat, and helping to learn more about and from Vanessa.
All right, thanks, Carminia. Vanessa, tell us a little about you.
Hi, I'm Vanessa Jimenez. I've pretty much spent my whole life here in Arizona. I have family outside of the state that I was very fortunate to visit. I come from a Mexican mom and a Black father. So thinking through how they came together, and just how my mom built my life from that point on. I'm a mom. I have two sons, 21 and 8. Proud of the big difference. So the big brother is truly a big brother. I work in education, but my first thing is my community and my family. So thank you guys for having me.
Of course. Thank you both. The Que Sepas video series like I mentioned, is a space that was created to have these conversations and advance equitable ideas to further, these related dialogues. Through partnerships and public engagements, the series aims to discuss critical questions, assess data, and engage the Latinx community with issues that matter to them the most and topics that address any anticipated barriers to opportunity and justice. This is an ongoing theme through these episodes, but with very much has been a theme in all of 2020 when it comes to just some of the issues related to race and race relations in the United States. I think that things came to a head a few months ago with the killing of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police, and it sparked worldwide protests against racism and police brutality. I think that for a lot of people, the moment, what happened afterwards, was inevitable, and so many years in the making. Many examples can be brought up as to, making parallels. I think even in just talking about and preparing about for this conversation and learning about very similar incidents that have happened time and time again, and really nothing done and no reaction in the way that George Floyd's death, the community responded to. And so this conversation we certainly wanted to have for non-Black Latinx community members to look inside of themselves, look at the community they exist in, and come to have a reckoning because there's still a lot of sentiments that are centuries old that exist that aren't helping progress as a Latinx community. And so, Carmenia, you this was you brought this idea to have this conversation, and so I certainly want you to uh, at what point was it elevated to you that this space was needed?
Yeah. So I think, as I mentioned, I'm originally from New York, and as a Dominican woman, my family is multiracial, even though we're all ethnically 100% Dominican. But appearance-wise, it's a broad range, and the more cousins you add in, the broader the spectrum. And so conversations related to this have been, like, I've been around that for a long time, and it peaks at different points in time, and so it sounds different when Black Lives Matter launched, and when these surges, these really like terrible surges happen, where there's just more attention and focus on the Black community generally. But having moved now to Phoenix 6 years ago, the conversation is just very different here, because the community is different, the population of folks, how many Black people, how many Latinx folks we have, and where people are from is different. And so I think specifically coming out of the recent murders over the last several months, and the statements around Latinx for Black Lives came out, and there were like signs made for Latinx for Black Lives. I remember thinking, but there aren't like Black people for Black Lives signs. So there's a disconnect for me about who were these signs for and who were they not for. And I think for me, it was something that was different than the other version of these signs that I think is, to me, we seem more aligned and more appropriate with this idea of a multiracial identity of Latinidad, was Las vidas negras importan, right? Like just actually putting it in Spanish for Spanish-speaking communities, because we have Black people in our community. And to say Latinx for Black Lives was, to me, separating that in a way that didn't make sense if you identified as a Black Latinx person. So I think it was right around that time when I was starting to really probe and have some of those conversations with people who don't identify as Black Latinx. So and hearing more about like what the thinking was behind something like that, and why folks felt the need to differentiate and separate. And I understood there are a lot of different issues, and people's identities are connected in different ways, and their proximity to an understanding of Blackness within the Latinx community is different. So I recognize that, but wanted to dig in a little bit deeper as somebody who grew up having these conversations, and wanted to hear more from folks about how those conversations played out, either in their upbringing or in their communities right now, where it might not be as proximate, or my understanding and my perspective was it didn't seem as proximate as it was growing up in the middle of New York City in a very like racially diverse and ethnically diverse community.
Right. And so Vanessa, I know you and I have known each other for a little bit. I think that even just in talking about this conversation, I've learned a lot more, and you have even guessed some things or said some things incorrectly. But based from what Carmina was relating to, do you mind telling us a little bit about background related to your family and what some of those conversations may have looked like as you confronted or maybe were made aware for the very first time that race is something that thinking of your earliest experience where you realized that you were of a different race, and then what it was for you in that moment?
Sure. So I think thinking through, my childhood and thinking of how when my mom chose to marry my dad, and her family's like, well, this is not happening. We're not going to accept it. But my mom moved forward. Love is love. And so that's what she went with. So in growing up, my mom, we didn't have those divides. We all were together, whether it was with our Cuban family neighbors, our Dominican neighbors, whoever lived around us, we didn't see the difference, and she just didn't raise us that way. But as you get older and have to interact with kids and they want to know and they ask these questions, it's like, how do you respond? And then having to ask my mom, like, well, you look white and I don't. And I told you, you know, my brothers, it's because you're adopted. Well, no, I'm not. Like, that's my mom. But being able to have that discussion of, I look like this and I don't look like my mom because of this great mix mescla of my mom and my dad. You know, my dad being a Black man from Louisiana and my mom being a Mexican from Arizona. And really embracing that, and then reaching that point in life where I don't have to explain this to you. I need to just get you to understand who I am as a person and what I have to offer, what I have to give to my community, to my job, to people around me. So having those conversations, it builds that strength. And thinking through my family now, you know, I first marriage was a Dominican because you're not raised to date still outside your race, even though Mexican is my race. You're just not, you don't go there. So naturally you go where you feel comfortable. I felt comfortable with Dominicans, you know, with Africans, with Jamaicans, whoever my mom brought around us. That was the culture we embraced. And there was no, like I said, there was no lines, there was no division. But even crossing into the Black community, it's like, well, how come you speak Spanish on the phone with your grandmother? You know, so still always having that explanation and being able to say we're all struggling. Your struggle is my struggle. We're not gonna decide how bad it is based on the shades. Like it gets worse the darker you are. No, we're all gonna be seen as struggling. So how can we bring that together? And just thinking through my family, and I know we had talked about with George Floyd, like why did it seem his murder was that like so much happened? And I think as a Black woman, seeing that we reached that enough point of finally coming together and saying this is not okay. Whereas before it's like, well, who's gonna stand behind me if I say something? And it kind of speaks to like Carmenia with the signs. Like we shouldn't have had to have signs. We should have just said, let's handle this, let's do this. So I think this is a start of, we've reached the enough point and we have to work towards it. And having those conversations with my family of, I'm gonna have to have different conversations with my sons than maybe my full 100% white passing Mexican cousin. Their conversations with their kids when they leave the house aren't going to be the same as mine. So how can we all come together and say, well, my kid's not at home, you watch out for mine and I'm going to watch out for yours. And making sure that we're on the same page. Like our people, our families, we have to take care of each other. So I think those conversations had to really attach to the human factor. And let's leave the color out of it and let's think of the human side and the human aspect of living beings and respecting and valuing that. So, I mean, those were the conversations I had to push. And it's hard, especially when you have family members who've never had to, you know, realize that it's different for you. Well, you're my cousin. I never thought you had to think that way. Well, yeah, I do. I have to have those conversations with my boys. And it's hard. It's really hard. So any chance I can, I have that conversation and push it. And your babies are my babies. I'm going to take care of them and make sure people understand that.
I hear that. I think in a lot of what you just explained, you know, certainly reaching that point and being tired and you know, that's where we are. But I do want to take a few steps back and kind of dive into where some of these elements came from. You know, is this a U.S. thing that you know, ingrained race and racism in this very specific way, or is it something that goes back further? And so, if we can, because I do want to circle back to some of these stories and how you and the advice you do give your sons and what it is that they're doing and how they've grown into their own individual identities. But taking some steps back, Carmenia, where do we start?
we, so you mentioned, race. This isn't a like U.S. centric thing. So if we go back to any of our native countries, right? You start with colonialism is where a lot of this is rooted and how it continues. And so we're going to read some definitions just to have common language, but when you have the political and economic phenomenon, whereby generally various European nations, and in many of our cases, it was Spain, depending on where you are, perhaps Portugal, and maybe France. But European nations explored, conquered, settled, and exploited large areas of the world.
Okay.
And that, that's where it starts. One of the pieces that we're not talking about, which is but a thing that I like to keep rooted in, is also the indigenous roots of where folks come from. And so here in Phoenix, and I missed this in my intro, but here in Phoenix right now, I'm sitting and living on the current and former indigenous land of the O'odham, Acapulco O'odham, and Hohokam people here in Arizona. And you can look at who the land and who was originally on all of the land that we're from. But colonialism with Europeans coming into our various countries is part of where it starts, and then you enter the enslavement of Africans and bringing folks over into the various countries, and you get into the next level once you start seeing differences between people around colorism and practicing discrimination based off of who's lighter or who's darker, and lighter skin, and the closer to white skin that you are, the more favored you are, the more privileges you might get, and then the further away from that and the darker your skin, the fewer privileges that you have, or the less access that you have. So those are the first couple of levels.
No, I love putting these words to some of the examples Vanessa gave. So colorism. Is this something that is a feeling, is a sentiment, or is it ingrained? Like, how do societies use that as a vehicle to separate different people that are different color? I guess for not to be circular, but is that what we're talking about here? Because people have people are different shades, that they are segmented in their communities differently.
Yeah, I can speak briefly. I mean, I think there's a term, and I'll have to find who I like to give credit where it's due. This idea of pigmentocracy, which I think is linked to colorism, and that's where colorism then becomes systemic. So it's when all of the people in power and all of the people in formal positions of power, leading governments, leading the major corporations that are actually running the economy of certain countries are all white. And as you get further from that, then the darker the skin tones become. And so I think if people are familiar with meritocracy or other ocracies, this one is based off of colorism and the pigment of your skin. And so it does become systematized. And sometimes I've heard this argument around it's not race, it's linked to class, and it's like rich and poor. So for some countries, to an extent, that might be the case. And I'd be interested if Danny or Vanessa, if you have different thoughts on this. But there's also when it's class, but all of the people with lots of money, almost all of them are white, and then all of the people without money and who are living in poverty are darker skinned, then it's not just about the money.
Right.
And somewhere in the system, it had to do, and there was something that was linked with race.
For sure. And so in the U.S., hundreds of years after the transatlantic slave trade, slavery was a thing in Latin America, and when it arrived to the U.S., was colorism or pigmentocracy? How did it exist in the U.S.? at first? Like in what ways, outside of, besides the existence of slavery as part of everyday, life, um, thinking, fast forwarding, to even in the last century, um, in what ways did it manifest itself? I guess what I'm trying to ask.
I don't I don't know if you're asking me or Carminia, but
Yeah,
I mean
yeah,
I can speak. So if you think about the earliest slaves were the indigenous people, but when unfortunately they were killed off through the colonialism, through you were you're bringing in things that the indigenous people had never dealt with, livestock, different fruits and vegetables, different diseases that they just could not fight off. So once you ran out of those people, where's the next place we've been that we can pick up slaves? And that's, we're going to bring West African people over to continue, because somebody's got to work the lands. We've already had them teach us how to plant and how to do all these things, but I can't sustain it. I still need the labor. I'm going to go find the labor and bring it. But the people bringing the labor were those white people. So naturally, you have that one up because I'm now the oppressor. And so from early on, slaves are looking at the darker you are, the less value you have. Even looking at in a Black community, it's seen. The lighter you are, the prettier you are, you're going to get the better job. It's not so much talent anymore, it's how you look. In slave days, it was the darker you are, the further away you are from the house. And the lighter you are, you can get that job in the house. Nobody thought, well, how come they're lighter? Well, it's because they've been raped, and part of this enslavement was just that. So it's not only an American thing, thinking through even other countries, it's still that the lighter you are, the class system goes up. And it's like a class caste system based on color. And it's unfortunate because it's like, at what point do we, as the younger generations, say, yeah, like that's enough? Like, we all can do this job, we all can do this. But it's because you look at TV, look at the novellas, they don't look like me, but the people who work in the house look like me, and that's a novella from Venezuela to Mexico. The house person is the darkest, and they could be Mexican, but because they're the darker one, they're not going to be that star cast member. So it's unfortunate. You look at the doll test. Even the little Black girls chose the white doll because it had been instilled in them that white is right. So it's being able to say it's not. And it's taken a long time because unfortunately, we haven't pushed it, or we've just accepted it. Like, oh, es que son medio tontos. Like, don't even have that conversation. They'll never get it. Well, no, we have to have that conversation because they have to get it. And so I think that's where a lot of the struggle has been. Getting past it is, I'm not going to have that conversation. They're not going to get it. Well, when you get to the US, it looks and feels different. It's just different here, whether you're a Black Latino or a Black male from America, you're going to be seen the same no matter what. So we have to push those conversations.
For sure, and I do want to dive deeper into how those things may manifest themselves individually and in our own psyche and our own confidence. But before that, talking a little bit about the codification of what it looked like in the U.S. to after slaves were freed. Slavery was, that chapter in American history was closed. But of course, the effects and everything that came after was, of course, a continued way to um, keep this population from advancing in a variety of different ways. And so I think that you've how do we? So I don't want to like jump ahead too much here, um, but talking about let's go maybe thinking about Latin America and some of the sentiments or feelings, and the sentiments and feelings that still exist today. Um, why was this something that was necessary, or maybe that people sought after, people of color to be lied? Like, why was that? Why was that the ideal? A European white. Why was that the bar and everything? You know, the further you strayed from that, the further away you are from advancement in society. Why was that the standard? And you know, do you think that it still exists in other ways today? Those biases.
Yeah, I can start. I mean, yes, they definitely still exist. We'll start there. To Vanessa's point, if you turn on a telenovela playing right now, it doesn't matter what language they're speaking or which country it's from. It's there. And I mean, I think this goes back, like, who has power, right? And who's telling people what is beautiful? Who's telling people how they can get to power? Is if there's a room full of people and you see that everyone who is lighter skin is the one who's getting chosen for something, or they're the ones who are getting access to money, right? Or access to the people who have power, then that's where I don't want to be here sitting poor and sad and hungry. I want to be where food and money and power is. And if the people who are lighter skin are the ones who are being identified as, like, that's beauty, right? Then that's what I want to be. And now generations later, then we pass that on, especially if we're not interrogating that, right? If we're not asking the question and having the conversations, then that's what it is. This is what beauty looks like, because when I grew up and my mom grew up and my grandmother grew up, that's what beauty looked like. And if we don't interrogate that, and because we haven't interrogated that as, like, whole communities consistently, I think there are definitely communities that haven't played into that or have broken out of that maybe more recently or longer ago. But it's gonna keep happening, and it requires a lot of work to undo that. It requires a ton of work to undo that. I have a 5-year-old daughter who is my same complexion. She's multi-ethnic, but my same complexion. And do you know how hard it is to find a brown or black doll somewhere? Like, literally, just access to and visibility to things makes it so that it right? So that's how it seems. That's how it keeps continuing. You see that all the examples that you see about what makes somebody successful or beautiful or wealthy or respected look a certain way, and until you start seeing more examples of something different, then you're not going to know, or you might not consider that there's an alternative.
That there's like a lot of emotions flowing right now, but I just think of the manifesting, you know, those ideals and never achieving your full potential because you started out thinking you were othered, you were, you know, because of just, you know, your characteristics, you know, and where do we, like, you know, thinking of, like, where do we go from here, and how do we begin to do that work effectively as allies, both, you know, members, non-Black Latinx community members, and folks who identify as Latinx, Afro-Latino. And so we have a question. I just want to go ahead and throw this out to Vanessa. I'm going to read this question that was posted on Facebook. Whiteness always adds to its understanding of belonging when the other becomes too dangerous. In the past, other communities, example Italians, Polish, etc., weren't considered white. As non-Black Latinxes continue to grow in population, more members of our communities are assimilating to whiteness, turning their backs on Black Indigenous people of color. What's the role of education in changing this paradigm? What is the role of school systems to create real alliances and unity amongst groups against white supremacy? So let's take that first part, education and changing this paradigm.
We have to start the education. Like, we're not even teaching real history classes, so you can't stop it if you're not willing to even hit it head on. Like, all they want to teach is we had 2 Black people. and we had this many Black Latinos, a baseball player and a singer. Like, we're not even willing to touch on the ugly side of it. So if we're not willing to have those real conversations and be able to tell somebody, you know, that's your implicit bias. I know that's how you were raised, but let me talk you through it. Let me show you historically. Here were some kings and queens, and they didn't look like that. You know, they weren't Queen Isabella, you know, having those conversations, but we have to have real history books, not ones that scratch the surface because it makes the teacher uncomfortable. It's making the teacher make that student comfortable and make that student comfortable in their skin. That's part of education. You can teach math, not every kid's gonna get it because math isn't taught for every student to understand, but you teach it and you keep teaching it until you make sure everybody can understand it. So it's the same thing as history and discussing the differences until everyone can finally get to that middle. But I mean, the start is, can I get a real history book? Like, that's the start. Let's get a real history book with a real history class. That's the start. So
the fact that you said two Black people and a singer and baseball player that are Black Latinx, and I knew immediately who you were talking about, is exactly the problem. Like, oh, the baseball player and the singer. Yes, okay. Celia Cruz. Yes, I got you. that right there epitomized everything about the problem that needs to be solved. Thank you for that.
So you do believe that is the role education played, these systems, that is there another venue that much not only education advocacy but understanding? Is there another venue possibly that could be the mobile for the change, or is education the one?
I think education historically has always been that trusted source. Like, we're going to trust the history book. We're going to trust the teachers. We're going to trust the principals. So a lot of families, you look in multiple cultures, it's the church and the school. They have more weight than the parents. So I think starting in schools is the biggest and the strongest platform that we can go to. The next one might be take on religion. And how does that look? Because, I mean, Carmina, you'd have to understand this. I grew up with Cubans. And so you see a Santa Barbara or you see the Virgen de Alta Gracia, well, they don't look like the Virgen de Guadalupe. And they sure don't look like Mary of the Lourdes. So starting with religion is another start, because we've separated even there, like, ooh, that's Santeria. No, it's not. It's the same saint you have sitting at your house, you know? So education starts there, and the next biggest, strongest understanding is usually religion. People meet for religious things, and they get on the same page. So for me, education, of course, it's the first thing, schools making it happen. And then do we start tackling religious forums? Because religious forums can become an extreme, or they can become that safe place. So right. That's what I think.
So I'm you touched a little bit on this. Oh, go ahead, Karina.
I just want to touch briefly on the education piece, and something that, in talking, my mom was a teacher in the Dominican Republic, and something that I didn't connect until recently was, here in the US, teachers, and we've talked about this in so many different ways, they're valued differently, and the profession is looked on very differently than it is, I'm using very kind words, very differently than it is in a lot of Latin American countries, right? And like, teachers are really respected, and so when you have families that are coming from cultures and from communities where, like, you trust the teacher, you trust the school implicitly and inherently, and I wonder if there's an element of, our educators also considering that parents are looking at them and looking to them potentially differently, and like truly trusting them to a degree that might not feel familiar for them here because of where folks are coming from. And so that there is an immense role that educators can play in helping to push that forward because of exactly what Vanessa said. You just trust the education and you take what's handed to you as truth and as fact, potentially without questioning because it's coming from the school. So why would you question it?
Yeah, Stephanie Parra, the executive director of my boss, the executive director of LNED, has an anecdote that, you know, sometimes that trust is like to a fault, you know, and when is there an understanding fully of like what trust they actually have, you know, and because I think every time that I look into like my experiences and pinpoint some of the more pivotal ones, there's always a conversation with my parents and, you know, just do what the teacher says, just respecting authority, and how much of that is like cultural and how much of it are we actually not benefiting from because of just simply respecting authority. And, you know, parallel to the conversation about race with elders in your community or with your own family, that goes against that basic level of respect and authority. And so what implications does that have for you at that point if you are speaking up about words that are said or things that are said or sentiments that are had that you've had enough of? And many of it does exist within our own families and circles where there's elders or authority figures. And what steps can be taken to do that in such a diplomatic way that it doesn't ruin relationships, or you know, cast you aside as being rebellious simply for requesting, you know, a change in mindset or perspective. I feel like that was an easy parallel to make, and then I kind of just jumped maybe a little too deep into that anecdote. But no, the teacher respect piece is something that I think about a lot because of they had so much influence on each step that I took throughout my schooling. And you know, is I think that and you know, the second question here, the role of school systems to create real alliances and unity among groups against white supremacy. Are there any additional thoughts on that?
I think part of it is teaching the American way, you know, challenging that thought of what is truly the American way. If we're a melting pot, you brought up, well, you know, the Italians and the Polish, they were seen as minorities. So reminding that at some point we changed the thinking and we made these changes. So I think we have to also be willing to push back on the changes that we need to see. And like I said, it's not comfortable. It's never comfortable. I mean, I get in arguments with my Nana and it's like, you know, good thing she's 91. She won't tell nobody none of this nonsense anymore of what I had to hear growing up. But it's challenging the thinking and looking for those allies and making sure that there's that level of understanding of what is okay. You may not look like me, but I want you to really empathize with what hurts me, so that you can help stand up against that. And we don't do that very well because we're still, like you said, we're afraid to be cast aside, or they're rebellious, you know, watch out, they're going to get on their tangent again. But we have to just keep having those conversations and keep going on our rants and raves and tangents. People have to get tired of it, just like we had enough with the murders. So people have to get tired of it to make that change.
And so talking a little bit more about the Black Lives Matter movement, how would you describe your place within the movement? Is it something that's clear? Is there something that you maybe feel like is difficult or you're fighting extra for when you're already fighting the fight as it stands? Just your general sentiments and feelings related to the Black Lives Matter movement and your place in it.
I think my place has been, and I've been very vocal more recently because thinking through, have I been a part of the system that's been holding even me back or holding my peers back. So finally reaching that point of saying, no, I am tired. I've been the safe, Black Latina for 25, 40 years. Like, at what point did I reach my enough point and say, I'm not going to be as calm about it. I'm going to be just as emotional and just as vulnerable and open as I've been quietly in my car or at my house. And I'm not just going to rant to the same person that feels the same way. I'm going to rant to the people who don't know how I feel, so that it gets out there and it's more understanding. And having to have discussions with my sons that I've had all along, but it didn't sink in, like, oh, mom doesn't know everything. But until you see it on the news, and thinking through, conversations we talked about this, my grandmother had to have with her boys when they left the house, and praying for my dad to come home, because back then you kind of knew the enemy. You knew black and white was so segregated, you knew the enemy, but making sure that my prayers shouldn't have to feel the same as my grandmother's, because it's been 80 years, but still having to have those conversations with my sons, and knowing that I'm going to have that conversation with as many people and as many other, whoever's going to listen, so that they feel the same struggle and pain that I feel for my community, for the students I'm around. I just had to become more vocal. And like I said, just reaching that enough point. I've been safe for a long time. Like, I can't be safe anymore, because now I'm just contributing to keeping it and minimizing it in my community and in my place of work. I can't anymore. So.
How do you elevate it? How do you I just 80 years, and you're describing this plight and this fight and these sentiments and this um, mental anguish and sacrifice that you share with the people who raised you and the people who raised them. Why hasn't there been this enough before? And in terms of the folks who are rallying around and lifting up these communities and of support, is it real?
I think it's most definitely real. I think before, it was more comfortable to be safe, and it was more comfortable to not speak out, because not as many people were willing to do it. We reached a point where I can look around and I'm not standing by myself anymore. There's somebody who's willing to say, I agree, what are we gonna do? And in the past, it was like, yeah, that sucks, that's too bad. But now it's, what are we going to do? Like, we can stand back and say, that sucks, man, I hope your kid makes it home on Friday night. Yeah, that's not enough. We have to come together. And now seeing that more people are willing to raise their hand and say, yeah, you know what, I disagree. Yeah, the system sucks, and the system has been made to hold everybody down here. I'm going to work on that with you. So I think that's where we are, is I don't feel alone anymore. I guess that's kind of it, is I don't feel like it's just my fight anymore, and I don't have to hold it as guarded. So I think that's what it is, really.
And so on the topic of allyship and solidarity, and taking it to that level, what does that look like for you? What does it mean to truly be an ally to other Latinx community members who are dealing with this struggle, and understanding that there's work that allies have to put in to learn, to listen, to understand, to educate themselves on this plight. What are some ways for you that are helpful from both allies and groups and systems that are true and real and sustaining?
That's a deep question, because I I don't think you get your list of allies, like here's my phone tree of allies. I'm going to check in with them on Tuesdays with this group and Wednesdays on this group and make sure you guys are still with me, right? Oh, you're not feeling too good. Okay, I'll call you next week again. I think it's truly building those systems, and it's that relationship and that understanding that you understand how I feel and are willing to feel that with me. And even though it may not affect you, you're willing to stand up against it and call it out when you see it. Be able to say, that's not me, but that doesn't seem like the right thing to do. Or maybe you should ask more questions, or maybe you should get to know that person better before you just jump on that bandwagon. So I think it's a building that has to happen. It's a trust. I don't think there's going to be a ton of white people that raise their hand and like, we're doing this, because they still have to build that trust that we're all going to go down together if we're doing this. So I think it's still going to take time. We still have to really pick apart the actual system, and people understand the different parts of it. Some are just in your face and some are so hidden. You talk about redlining, it's becoming in your face again. And I'm like, how are we there again? Like, I can't move to the suburbs. Like, that was so 1960s. But being able to pick apart those parts of the system, and be able to come to that agreement that we're gonna be on the same fight. And I mean, I don't know, Carminia, if you see a little bit different, but I think it's relationships, trust, and getting that group of people together.
Yeah, in thinking about my role as an aspiring ally, because I like to think of this as a journey, right? I haven't gotten my "You're an Ally" card for the Black community in any space, and there's levels to the allyship, right? I was in a conversation a couple of weeks ago around disabilities, and the gaps in knowledge and awareness when we are organizing and having movements, and is it accessible to people? Are we, the layers. So I recognize that as well. I think in the realm of Afro-Latinidad and Black Latinx people, for me, as somebody who doesn't identify as Black, I am Afro-descendiente. I have, I did my 23andMe, and it showed me exactly what I thought. It's like roughly half Spanish, roughly half West African. Like, yeah, that makes sense. But I don't walk through the world as a Black woman. So for me, I show up as an aspiring ally to the Black community generally, and in spaces where I might have a little bit more room to step up or step forward for somebody, I try to take those. And talking to a good friend of mine, sometimes like y'all need to rest. Like, people actually need to rest, and somebody needs to be able to step up and continue the fight while the rest of the community is actually taking a break and catching up with their family and rejuvenating their lives so that they can continue the fight. And I think that's the role that aspiring allies can play, is to step up and say, like, we're going to hold this down, whether it's in this meeting or like, I'll take the brunt of the conversation, like this tough conversation. I can take this on because I have the emotional capacity, right? And I haven't been having these conversations every hour for the last week. I can take this on today so that you don't have to, so that you can actually just breathe, or you can join in, and I can take the lead on this. And I've seen, I try to do that for folks in my circles, and I have seen other people do that for them and do that for me, right? I've seen white women step up and say, like, no, I'll bring this up because you brought this up the last 4 times and nothing happened. So I'll do it this time and we'll see if something changes. So there's a level of awareness of when things are and aren't working, and being able to, where we might have a little bit more capacity to do things a little bit more, just emotional strength to do it in that moment, if whatever that might be, to take those opportunities to let those of us who who might not be there right now, who might need that rest to take that reprieve, and for us to step up and actually show up, right? Because allyship to me is about like me putting myself on the line the way that you are forced to put yourself on the line every day, right? Like your safety, right? And Vanessa, when you're talking about your son's safety and whether or not they're coming home, that's not, they don't get to choose when and whether or not they get to do that, right? Like the second, I mean, I was going to say the second they walk out the door, that isn't guaranteed, unfortunately, at this point. But from that moment, it's already on the line. And so if others aren't willing to also step forward to put their comfort on the line, then we're not going to, that's what's required for me to see somebody as an ally for me in whatever my struggles or my conversations are. And when I think of the role that I want to play as an aspiring ally for folks who might be in different identities than I am and might need that allyship, then I need to be able to get uncomfortable. And I need to be able to put something on the line because others are having to do it unwillingly and by default.
There's a lot of great lines there that I just kind of want to put on posters as reminders to myself. That is the two pieces there on allyship are great takeaways and things we need to continue to put out in this space and remind people who do want to raise their commitment in that way. The next, before we wrap up, I just want to kind of shift a little bit and discuss Black affirmation. What is that to you? What does that mean to you? And how do we get there? And I say we, how do we get to a place where we aren't negatively fighting, these manifestations from this idea that skin color, the darker that is a bad thing. How do we grow to a place where we are affirming and what is Black affirmation to you, Vanessa?
I think it's becoming or having that ability to say Black is beautiful. Being able that when you hear, well, the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice, all of those things, it's okay. I think for me, being able to look in the mirror or something I always do when I'm out and about, if I see any little kid, I tell them all something about them that I love. Even they've got their little curly ponytail just all disheveled. I love your hair. I love your dress. You look so cute. You are beautiful. And saying you are beautiful even to little boys. They can be beautiful. They're beings. And thinking through my connection to every living being in the world, having the same mitochondrial Eve, like we're all interconnected, but being able to tell every person they are beautiful and something about them that I appreciate and I love. And it's taken me time to do that because for a long time I would see it and I'm like, that's awkward. But then hearing somebody say it to me, I'm like, man, that really made me feel good. I wasn't feeling too good about my hair today, So being able to say that, and that's how we start affirming and not necessarily having to say, oh, you're Black and you're so cute. It's just affirming that it doesn't matter, like removing the color from it and you are beautiful. I love your hair. I love your face. I love your dress, your shoes, whatever it is, but just bringing each other up so that it becomes a normal and a natural. I think that's where we start. And that's what I've had to do for myself. And it's a journey, it's slow, but it's a process we all have to just continually work on and deal with.
I think one of the things that we were in terms of the definitions and just some of the things that branched out from some of those sentiments, or even some of these words that I learned over just the past few months. Blanqueamiento, mejor la raza, pelo malo. Those are things that are identifiable, but not always associated as a negative or as a put down, when mejor la raza is just that direct translation is something that like supposed to be something you're supposed to strive for. And so how do we those phrases are part of this as well. And so when in terms of Black affirmation and how do we address those types of structures that exist and are ingrained in perhaps some of the elders within our community?
We have to stop repeating them. Like, stop saying them. I mean, I just told a student that like 2 years ago, and I'm like, no. And he's like, no, miss, I'm serious. And I'm like, but I am too. Like, I'm not going to repeat it, and I don't agree with it. So I think we have to stop making it okay to say. And I know we laugh about it, but at some point we have to like stop laughing, like, that's crazy. Like, really, like, no, I don't see it like that. Don't agree. So I think that's a good start, is just take it out of our vocabulary for one. So.
No, well, I just want to thank you both for being a part of this. I especially wanted to just say, Carminia, I don't know how much anguish you put into just my planning for this, but I am really grateful that this is where we're at. This was, like I mentioned earlier, months in the making. And I'm glad that we took the steps we did to prepare for a conversation that did have a space and can continue in realistic ways. And so, Vanessa, you're my favorite, and you know that. And so, special thank you to both of you. And Anais, our communications director, for helping make not only Que Sepas, but this episode what it is. Before we end, though, we have a tradition here at Que Sepas. We end with two questions, one related to cultural icons and another related to canceling or throwing a chancla at something. And so, Carminia, if you have thoughts, we'd love to hear what you have for these. But I'm just going to read the question out. Imagine that All in Education is updating the iconic Loteria card images and has asked you to submit a suggestion for consideration. Who or what Latinx cultural icon would you suggest and why? So, Vanessa, what are your thoughts?
Of course, I'm gonna have to put Celia on the map.
Yes.
Celia is gonna be my Hollywood Square. She's gonna be my Loteria spot on the map. That's my Hispanic mom. If my mom I really was adopted, I'm like, well, then Celia's my mom. Then Celia has to be my mom. So Celia Cruz is going to be right there, smack dab on the card.
Awesome. Carminia, if you had to throw
I love that. Yeah, for my, so I'm wearing the shirt. This would be my Loteria card. These are muñecas sin rostros. They're traditionally made Dominican dolls. They come in all shades of brown, and they don't have faces. And the story behind it is the reason they don't have faces is because there isn't a single physical appearance to Dominicans. So they made them intentionally without faces because Dominicans look all different shades. They have all different sorts of physical features. And I'm thinking about this conversation, and just they're so beautiful to see. I would want to put that on a Loteria card.
What did you say? What did you say it's called?
They're called muñecas sin rostros. So literally dolls without faces.
Okay. Cool. Very cool. I love that. So last question, related to La Chancla. Consider how you're feeling today in this moment, or just generally, if you could cancel or throw the chancla at one item, at one thing, one entity, one thought, one frustration, what would it be? And if you care to share, why? Carminia, let's start with you.
Sure. Mine is, I was watching videos this morning. Instagram is where I do a lot of like my starting learning, and then I go and dig in deeper. I would throw the chancla at, I'm having a lot of feelings around the terminology of white passing to describe racially white people from generally from Latin America, where like there's no white passing in Latin America. You don't refer to anybody as white. There's no word for that. And somehow in the U.S. we got there. So like, you're white Mexican. It's fine. It's gonna be okay. No one is saying somebody's black passing. Like, that's not a thing. You're white and whatever country you're from, and it's gonna be all right. Like, you still speak Spanish. If you speak Spanish, your name is what it is. It's gonna be okay. So that would be what I throw the chancla at, is the term white passing. It's not real. Boom.
Yeah, I think that's very compelling, and I love that that was like a impassioned, like, this is why. These are 3 reasons why. No, that's great. That's great. Vanessa?
I think I'd have to throw my chancla at just systemic racism. I think we've reached that point where it just needs to go away, and we need to start picking at the different layers of it so that it's gone. I think that's where my chancla would go, because I've seen so much in the last few years where we've had to really come to terms with just how we've accepted it and allowed it to be there and never challenged it. So I think it's time to throw the chancla at it and level that playing field. So that's where my chancla's going.
For sure. No, happy to throw mine as well. Thank you both for sharing those pieces. For anybody watching who is interested in any aspect of this conversation and wants to learn more, Carmini and I put together a list of a variety of resources, from podcasts to YouTube videos, to a variety of community organizations who are able and willing to share resources that they put together on some of these subjects, and even going deeper into other communities that might exist and identify this way as well. Please reach out to us either via Facebook or whatever means. Reach out to us, and I'm happy to share that list. I think some of those items will be posted on Facebook as well. But thank you for watching, and I hope everybody has a good it's still October, a good end of October. I'm totally lost as to what month and day it is. Jeez, it's 2020. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Que Sepas. Have a great day. Thanks, everyone.